Hi, my name is Rick Olderman. I'm a physical therapist here at Body and Balance Physical Therapy, and I'm here with Katie Mason, who's a licensed psychotherapist here in Denver, and we're here to talk to you about emotions and chronic pain. So let's get started. So I want to first talk to you about what is chronic pain. And so what I'm talking about here is that chronic pain is usually defined by a lot of increased muscle tension. It's global pain. It happens for a long period of time, such as, longer than 3 months is the typical definition. And what I see in my clinic is often it also involves things like digestive issues, for instance, irritable bowel syndrome, or multiple systems of, say, autoimmune issues. So we're talking about a different kind of pain than most, straightforward back pain. So what can explain all of this? Why do we have pain that might be affecting all of our systems? And in my mind, it seems that there must be a central control mechanism involved here. And what I believe is happening is that the brain is involved. And so the brain is the ultimate controller of all the systems in our body. It controls the release of hormones, it controls digestion, heart rate, breathing, all sorts of things. So it is also the gateway to another nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is comprised of both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And the reason this is important is that the sympathetic nervous system is activated when we're threatened. And it is our fight or flight system. You may have heard that term before. And what happens here is that our heart rate increases, the breathing rate increases, it slows down our digestion. And many of you have probably heard stories about, when we're faced with a threat, you can lift a car off a child or something like that. We have extraordinary strength, and that's due to adrenaline coursing through our blood vessels and into our muscles. So there's a lot of things going on with the sympathetic nervous system activation. And counter to that is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is the system that's responsible for decreasing our heart rate and decreasing our breathing rate. It slows down and helps digestion. And it also generally decreases muscle tension. So these two systems are always in balance. Sometimes when the sympathetic nervous system is elevated, then the parasympathetic nervous system is depressed. And if the parasympathetic nervous system is elevated, then the sympathetic nervous system is depressed. So they're always in homeostasis in our body. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is fascia. And I think this is an important issue when we're talking about emotions and chronic pain. You'll see why in just a moment. Fascia is connective tissue. And by that I mean it's a tissue that connects everything in the body. It connects muscles to muscles, muscles to bones and tendons. It wraps around nerves, blood vessels, organs, and it also is able to contract. So we have these lines of fascia in our body. And so the lines of fascia can extend all the way from our head all the way to the bottom of our feet. Now this includes muscle, of course, but it also includes the tendons, the ligaments, and so forth. This whole tissue can be dissected as one continuous tissue throughout the body. So this is one fascial superhighway, if you want to think about it like that, that connects our head to our foot. And if you look over here on the other side, we have other lines of fascia that connect the head to the foot. Okay. We also have other lines that spiral across our body and lines that run in the front of our bodies. So these lines of fascia become very important in my mind because they connect different areas of our bodies together, and they are contractile. And the thing that's important, the reason I mentioned fascia and the sympathetic nervous system is that the sympathetic nervous system can increase contractility of fascia. So the way it works is this. In areas of mechanical stress in our bodies, fascia is laid down in a form called myofibroblasts. And myofibroblasts have up to 4 times the contractility of regular fascia. And so, for instance, in our low back, we have a thick lumbar, thoracolumbar fascia. and that has a high concentration of myofibroblasts. Well, it turns out that the sympathetic nervous system, when it's activated, it causes the release of a cytokine from the immune system. And the cytokine in question here is transforming growth factor beta 1. And so that is secreted throughout our body, and it causes the myofibroblasts to contract. And so if we have areas of mechanical tension in our body that have laid down these myofibroblasts, then they are particularly susceptible to sympathetic nervous system activation. So the contraction of fascia, therefore, can occur in patterns, like you just saw a few of them there, running from the foot to the head. So in my experience, there are 3 patterns of fascial contraction or musculoskeletal contraction, or patterns of back pain. And there are other patterns that are associated with neck pain in my experience. So here's a couple other pictures of lines of fascia in our body. So let's say you have neck pain. Well, if you're just looking at the neck because you have neck pain, then I think you're not looking at enough of an expanse of the body. So I have had great success in helping neck pain by not only treating the neck, but also the hand, the arm, and the shoulder blade especially. The shoulder blade is critical for treating neck pain. And so these lines of fascia kind of help explain why treating the whole system rather than just the small portion of the neck is important for eliminating neck pain and headaches. So when emotional or psychological trauma is present, such as during an auto accident, perhaps you have some childhood trauma or other types of stressors, we have to consider the emotional source of pain, especially if that pain becomes chronic. And let's say you've gone to several practitioners and you don't seem to be making any progress. We have to consider this possible emotional source as a source of your chronic pain. So in the clinic here, we can address those by working with the body. So we have a few techniques that I use here in the clinic and my other therapists, which help calm down the nervous system and decrease the sympathetic nervous system response. They're very I would say, effective in causing the body to relax. And what these do is they increase the parasympathetic nervous system levels and therefore decrease muscle tension and pain. And it's not uncommon for people to bring up emotional issues while we're doing this, especially if those emotional issues seem to be correlated to their patterns of contraction. But we can also address the emotional issues through psychology, and also which will help us decrease muscle tension as well. So I'm going to turn you over to Katie to talk about that.
Thanks, Rick. So hello, my name is Katie Mason again, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. And my work in the mental health field initially started focusing on people struggling with depression, severe anxiety, grief, post-traumatic stress disorder, those type of things. And it became very apparent to me early on in my work with others that I could only help somebody so far without simultaneously addressing their physical body, because our emotions and our physical body are directly intertwined. And I'm going to speak more about that throughout the rest of this presentation to help you better understand the connection between the two. To begin, we're going to watch a few minutes of a short video that will show very clearly this relationship, and I want you to really pay attention and focus on the vibrational aspects of both the polar bear and the woman in the video, because that's what we'll be talking about the most.
Looks like a fatty. We'll go for that one, Dennis. Oh yeah. Holy snapper. If you watch that animal after he finishes convulsing, you'll see, because he's aware of the fact that we're all around him, and it's a very stressful experience for an animal like a polar bear. Even after he settles down, and then he'll start doing a couple of deep breaths, and then he'll breathe really nicely, and it'll here he goes. See how he's breathing in now? You can see, so that even though it looks a little unpleasant to look at him convulsing like that, in fact, it lets off all that stress, and he then is able to relax and sleep the thing off.
What the fuck is wrong with me?
Okay, I know that's a really intense video, and this isn't to suggest that everybody who has chronic pain has this severe type of trauma that this woman experienced, but what you will begin to see through the rest of the presentation is that that most of us are carrying around some form of trauma in our body that is definitely contributing to our pain and or illness, for that matter. I like this picture for many reasons because I think it really shows that our body is this holistic organism, and we have to begin to see that our emotions and trauma histories are literally trapped inside of our body. So the question becomes, how do these emotions get trapped in our body? And what does that even mean? So when we are reacting to an emotionally charged experience or trauma, and for the sake of this presentation, I'm merely defining trauma as any experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling hopeless and helpless. So when we are reacting to a trauma in our body, it typically responds in three ways. The fight, flight, or freeze response. Most of us have heard these terms, and Rick even referenced them. And we know that when our brother attacked us as a kid and we threw a punch at him, that we were fighting, or that when our dad was really angry at us, and threatened to hurt us, and we ran away to our neighbor's house that we were taking flight or fleeing. But what needs to be better understood really is this freeze response. Understanding the freeze response helps us to better know how trauma gets trapped in our body and how when it stays trapped, it leads to our physical pain, particularly in this case. Peter Levine is best known for his work Waking the Tiger, which is a guide to healing trauma. Peter has a PhD in medical and biological physics, as well as a PhD in psychology. And Levine describes certain species, how certain species have developed mechanisms that are especially well suited to keeping them safe. That behaviors of fighting, fleeing, and freezing are so primitive, and that survival tools are found in all species, from spiders and cockroaches to primates and human beings. But in regards to the freeze response, there is a significant difference in the physiology of, say, a possum playing dead and a human that goes into shock and freezes after witnessing a car crash, for example. Levine uses the example that when you watch a deer carefully through binoculars, similarly to like we saw with the polar bear, that you see them react to the sound of a loud branch or twig snapping in the forest. The deer become hypervigilant and still, and they may be ready to flee or fight, but at any moment they are frozen, hypervigilant, and filled with fear over what caused the breaking branch and whether or not a predator is at their footsteps. When the deer determine that they aren't in danger, they are ready to transition from the state of activated hypervigilance back to one of normal, relaxed activity. And like you saw with the polar bear, when you closely observe, you can see that they begin to vibrate, twitch, or lightly tremble. This process for the deer starts with a light vibration or twitching up in the top of their neck. It moves down through their shoulders, into their torso, back down through their legs, and almost like it goes out through their feet. These little tremblings of muscular tissue are the organism's way of regulating extremely different states of nervous system activation. Deer move through this rhythmic cycle perhaps hundreds of times a day. Essentially, this animal is moving easily through states of relaxed alertness and tense hypervigilance. So, why don't humans do this? Well, we can blame it on the neocortex, or our rational brain. This is a part of our brain that is unique to humans and differentiates us from other mammals. It's highly evolved, and so it's powerful and complex. And through fear and over control with the neocortex, we can interfere with subtle restorative responses generated by our deeper instincts that are stored in our more primitive brain, or reptilian brain. The reptilian part of our brain is where those fight, flight, or freeze responses are stored. And although the neocortex is not powerful enough to override those responses to danger altogether, it does tend to interfere with our natural return to normal functioning after a perceived threat. And essentially interfering with that discharge process that was described with the deer and that you saw with the woman and the polar bear in the video, that vibration, that shaking. So basically, our traumas are not allowed to finish their instinctual cycle, and therefore the trauma itself gets trapped in the body and is not energetically or vibrationally released. So imagine years of this incomplete cycle of trapped emotional stressors in your body, lying stagnant, contributing, if not altogether, creating your pain. So, therefore, chronic stress or these traumas creates this chronic tension, and this chronic tension creates this chronic pain. As I mentioned earlier, that trauma is merely any experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless and hopeless. This is really important because what one person experiences as traumatic may not necessarily feel traumatic to another person. Trauma is subjective. So long-term exposure to stress of any kind by nature is traumatic. And creates this stagnant feeling in our body, which again creates this pain. So remembering that, You and your brother, for example, may have had the same exact childhood, experienced the same exact parents, but the way that you responded to that trauma was different. And so one of you may have more physical pain later in life than the other. And that's because we're all individual when it comes to processing our trauma. Again, chronic pain obviously did not happen overnight. That's why it's called chronic. So you have to learn to understand the roots of your individual pain and assess the whole history of your body. And by exploring these roots through some techniques I will talk about, psychotherapy being one of them, also guided meditation, which is has similar effects to the hypnosis that you saw earlier on in the video. But by exploring those, you can not only bring yourself emotional relief, but you can also bring yourself physical relief, because again, they go hand in hand. So I really see chronic pain as this invitation to deep, deep healing, to deepen self-care and nurturing, to find safety, to release old stuck emotions, and last but not least, to befriend our wild and often negatively biased mind. So, what does it mean to be unconditionally nurturing to ourselves? I think this is probably the hardest and most important thing anybody can learn to do for themselves. And it essentially means reparenting yourself. Most of us, even with the best well-intended parents, didn't get what we needed emotionally to feel safe, secure, and supported as children. We have to fully name that. There's a saying within Peter Levine's work: to name it is to tame it. And the idea, by merely naming an experience, we tame the nervous system and help our body relax. So we have to fully understand what we did not receive as children in order to give us what we do need as adults. Not only that, but we have to understand that our world around us is not particularly nurturing, whether it's from, advertisements telling us we aren't enough, we're not skinny enough, we're not rich enough, we're not smart enough, we're technologically overstimulated, which creates stress on the body. And we are also coming against environmental stressors just from being kids, bullies at school, teachers that were strict or didn't make us feel smart, those type of influences. So essentially, you have to start to rewire your relationship to everything and begin to imagine that you are suddenly the parent of a 3-year-old. And for those of you who have kids, you understand how incredibly difficult it is to raise a toddler. When you're tending to your inner 3-year-old, you have to start revisioning how you take care of yourself. And there's 3 particular things that I found really helpful: protection, play, and patience. It's important to start guarding yourself from the quote unquote energy suckers of your life. Would you let a 3-year-old be around your old roommate when she makes you feel exhausted all the time? Would you let a 3-year-old be around your mother when she's so critical of you that you always feel depleted after you've been with her? What people, particularly in your life, and environmental influences are creating stress for you, and how do you protect yourself from that? Play, the other piece. We have to find better ways to play as adults, in the simple ways that we found pleasure as kids: flying kites, putting together a puzzle, painting a picture. We've really lost this ability to play and live more lightly in the moment as adults, and we have to relearn how to do that, even through pain and fatigue, in order to lighten our overall nervous system. And finally, patience. It's really easy to get frustrated with yourself, but how would you teach a 3-year-old to get well from being sick or hurt? You would rub their back, you tell them it's okay to cry if they're frustrated, to release it. You would want them to feel comforted and safe. So how do you do that for yourself? You have to learn ways to take care of yourself, to give yourself the time it needs to heal. This is also why we can't do it alone. The need for counseling and other support to heal emotional wounds is essential. You must find safety to release these old stuck emotions. As we saw in the video earlier, that woman could not have released those emotions if she was not being held by a trusted other. Whether that's a therapist, a friend, or whatnot, you have to find that support. To give you an example of this, I not too long ago was working with a gentleman, big tough guy, who had quite a bit of trauma history, and I basically named his experience. I just said that, after weeks of working together, that it was clear that to me that his father did not provide a nurturing environment for him. His father was very abusive and condescending and belittled him all the time. I also took him through some guided imagery work through his childhood, working with trapped old memories, which I will talk about in the next couple slides as well. But essentially, by telling him that his father was not able to give him what he needed, I named it. And like I said earlier, to name it is to tame it. And what started to happen was really interesting. He started to get so emotional. There was some tears. And after those tears were released, he started to vibrate and twitch slowly, similarly to like you found in the video earlier. So what came after that was he followed back up with me in 2 weeks, and because I had encouraged him to journal and write more about this experience, he said that he cried as he journaled, and he shook vibrationally. He found himself trembling for a couple days thereafter, and by the time he came back to our session, he said he felt the best physically and emotionally he had felt his entire life. So that just shows the power of having that support to go into those emotional experiences and release them. Last but definitely not least, I'm going to speak about the mind as the final frontier for healing chronic pain. Once we move through these emotional pieces, it's really important that we begin to work with and understand our minds. Learning to rewire our minds is some of the most difficult things that we face, I think, as human beings. But to give you some examples about the power of our mind, I want to talk about the nocebo effect. Many of us have heard about the placebo effect, which is a healing-inducing effect that patients in clinical trials experience when they believe they are getting a fancy new drug or surgery, when in fact they are actually getting a fake treatment. The placebo effect is real, and studies show it works 18 to 80% of the time. And that's not just in our heads. Patients were found when given placebo medication, for example, that their bodies began to heal ulcers, drop in blood pressure, and what was even found was that bald men who thought they were getting Rogaine actually began to grow hair when they were just getting sugar pills. I think that's pretty amazing. But the placebo has a shadow side, which is called the nocebo effect. And when patients in double-blinded clinical trials were warned about the side effects they may experience if they are given the real drug, about 25% of patients experienced those severe side effects even when they were only given sugar pills. Patients given those sugar pills reported fatigue, vomiting, muscle weakness, colds, ringing in the ears, memory disturbances, and a whole host of other symptoms that should not result from sugar pills. And this was not random. They tended to arise in response to the side effects warnings on the actual treatment. For example, patients who were given nothing but saline and told it was chemotherapy actually threw up and began to lose their hair. So what does this mean for chronic pain? I think it's emphasizing the power of our minds have over our physical symptoms, and we have to learn to harness this power for a positive outcome. From my experience working with individuals with chronic pain and illness for that matter, I found that they overwhelmingly have an ingrained inner critic and negatively biased mind. It's often a defense mechanism that started really early on in their childhood. But what this research is revealing is that we have to begin to learn how to retrain our mind to not just think positively in this Pollyanna sort of way, but to focus on things that make us feel good. Focus on things that are working as much as we put our attention on the things that aren't working. Because that has a significant impact on our physical body and its ability to heal. I think that guided meditation is just one of many ways that you can begin to work with your mind to retrain it to be more gentle and nurturing on your body. The power of image, it cannot be overstated. We live in a culture where we are captivated by images. We get sucked into programs or videos, not necessarily for the content as much as the appeal of the imaging. We can also get images from our childhood that get trapped in our body, old childhood memories, or trapped in our mind that we can play through over and over. And something like guided meditation can help you work through those images so that they don't have as much charge for you. So I really encourage you to look into some other forms of working with your mind, particularly like guided meditation. Again, it's just one of many ways to help us rewire and settle the mind.